G'day, Stu from UAVfutures here, and in this video we're going to be exploring remote ID. We're going to be talking about its objectives, its limitations and potential dangers to both recreational users and also industry. And towards the end of the video we're going to be talking about some other proposed alternatives that people can use or communities can use or industry can use that meet some of the objectives that the remote ID is trying to do without some of the drawbacks associated with it. So let's kick it off. All the timestamps are going to be down below, as well as you can click a bunch of links for some external links and all that sort of stuff as well. Check the description, drop some comments, all that sort of stuff. We've got a bit to get through. I put a bit of time in this, so hopefully some other people can use this as a resource as well. So to kick it off, what is remote ID? Essentially, remote ID is a proposal that all aircraft, manned or unmanned, have the ability to transmit or broadcast data of what they're doing, where they are, where their operator is, and essentially how they are acting in that airspace. Now, it's going to be achieved. There's a couple of different ways. You can check the references down below, but essentially what it is seeming like is you can put a little transponder on a drone that will broadcast that information to the people who are interested in collecting that data, and they can do with that data what they like. Now, it might sound good on paper when you look at some of the objectives, but if we dive a little deeper, you'll see that it is massively flawed and has some potential disaster hidden within. So, and I mean real serious disaster that can cause quite a lot of chaos within the community, and the safety of others would be jeopardized. So let's have a look. These are some of the general objectives of remote ID, and I'm going to be talking and referencing quite a lot about the FAA, so that's over in America. That's I think the Federal Aviation Authority that determines how this is going to be proposed in America and what America does. The rest of the world does tend to follow quite a bit, and especially here in Australia we've got CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. Well, I always refer to it as CASA. You can check their links out down below. They've got some quite good resources as well. And I don't intend to bash on either of those organisations. I would just like to spread the word and discuss, as someone who has been in the hobby, in the airspace, both regarding industry, commercial, community and recreational. You can see I have been here for about 10 years dealing with drones, dealing with aircraft, being involved in the airspace and all those places. So I do have a little bit of experience that I'd like to share with you, and hopefully we can make the world and the airspace a safer place for all and a better place for us all to enjoy. All right, so these are the objectives of remote ID. So they would like to increase situational awareness to prevent mid-air collisions with traditional aircraft and other aircraft. I guess they're saying traditional aircraft like a plane, other aircraft, I guess like some drones or some things it's getting more and more common. They would like to track illegal or non-compliant drone users. The objective of remote ID would also hope to educate the community around local laws and regulations regarding drone use. A gathering of data which will form evidence-based to support future regulatory and future development, future policy development. They would like to facilitate faster, more efficient and more automated approvals to operate in airspace for which drones may need permission, and they need to support management of and they would hope the objective of remote ID would support the management of and a response to other drone-related issues, like noise, privacy, environmental things, through adjacent technologies. And so if you've got a noise complaint, you can ring up and say, hey, someone's flying around here, can you please check these people out? They're hoping that remote ID will solve some of those problems. Now, if they all sound like great things, yes, I would like the airspace to be safer. I would like to know who's using illegal drones out there, who's going to use them for some nefarious acts, some criminals or terrorists or something like that. There is big safety and privacy concerns around all this, and there's quite a bit to get through. Rightio, so with those objectives out of the way, let's talk about some of the limitations of remote ID. So not all aircraft can be fitted with remote ID. Number one, many of these smaller aircraft, they've got no reasonable way of being able to communicate or broadcast that information. The technology just simply not exists. So these toy drones, this is less than 30 grams flying this around, and there is no way that you're going to be able to fit that with a remote ID system. It doesn't have enough power from its little single cell LiPo battery to be able to transmit that data. It's going to be far too heavy for it. There's just no way that this can carry and transmit and do what the regulatory bodies expect remote ID to do. So that class of drone, this would be outlawed. There would be no more flying of this. We have some network and wireless limitation issues. Currently, you can fly this drone without needing to be connected to the internet. However, if you did manage to get remote ID on some of a larger drone like that, and you could be somewhere where their network could be down, you could be out of cell range, like out of cellular data range, or not within range of your mobile phone tower or anything like that, you cannot fly. Sorry, because without that connection, you're not going to be able to broadcast and send that information out correctly. The new technologies, they've got to be introduced into an already congested network of information. So not only will aircraft have to deal with already what is happening around them, now there is another layer of information coming in. So that's going to come with its associated headaches, growing pains, the costs associated with that, extra stress, some extra things put on the pilots and also the infrastructure that's happening within that network. And the other thing, you're going to need to educate the public. I don't know, there doesn't seem to be any plan on how to do that, to educate the public on how to use remote ID and its data. So having a remote ID on here, in no way, shape or form does that inform me adequately or easily about the correct laws or anything like that when flying around. Remote ID, it is a tool, it is not a teacher. So that does not help me understand. A little transponder on a drone is not going to help me understand the airspace any better than some other simpler methods, which we'll get to towards the end of this video. So moving on to the next part of the video, the dangers and problems with remote ID to industry and the commercial sector. So here we have some real dangers to our society. I guess we are often, remote ID talks about things like bad actors, security and those sorts of things. This one, it could potentially be extremely damaging to the airspace. So what happens, for example, I would like you to imagine a situation where someone has a transponder, and I saw this in another video as well, I'll link that down below, another hypothetical video where they take one of the remote ID responders, they set it so it says, yes, we're flying, they hide it somewhere on a taxi that stops in at the airport. Well, that taxi is going to be driving in and out of the airport all day, dropping passengers off, picking them up. They could be completely unaware that that transponder is hidden on their vehicle. However, that airport, it's going to go into absolute chaos. That airspace will be shut down. The airtail will be getting pinged constantly. And not only will they be under stress looking for more drones, we'll have planes flying around being forced to make decisions that they don't actually have to make because the drone isn't actually in the sky. Remote ID is opening up a potential disaster for bad actors to play havoc on our airspaces with restricted fly zones and setting off false positives. There is the tracking and surveillance of aircraft and operations by people with illegal intentions. As it stands currently, under the remote ID proposal, any person, you can open up a smartphone and you will be able to see what is flying in the area and exactly who is flying it. Now, what happens if you're out there, you're working for somebody, you have thousands of dollars of equipment and somebody comes along, you get held up, the company could lose a lot of money, it's going to be a big headache for insurance companies, there's potential loss of life as well, which is the absolute tragedy, and there's other situations where you might be conducting some research or you might be flying around with something that is critical to your market or to your workplace or something that you've worked on, and that intellectual property, those things that you've discovered, and you might have something that is a trade secret to your organization. Well, now other companies who are flying around possibly doing the same thing, they're going to be they can see exactly where you're flying, and they can start looking at some of the data that you might be doing. They might be able to send out some of their own drones to collect some of that. The stuff that you've worked hard on as a company could be in danger of being stolen and having other companies come in to look at that as well. Think of it, I guess, a bit like you might be a fisherman and you might know some good spots, some secret spots. And what about if you went out fishing every time, and then all of a sudden, every time you cast your rod in the ocean or around the bay, well, it let off a little alarm and all the other fishermen out there could see exactly where you're fishing. You might not like that, and in a similar way, some companies might not like that as well. There's also the stifling of innovation when it comes to the technological advancements due to the remote ID implications. So Neil Armstrong, the person who stepped on the moon, well, he built and played with model aircraft when he was a kid. No remote ID was needed. Now, if you are building and flying aircraft and now you have to also add on remote ID, that's going to put that hobby, that passion of flying and those experiences out of many hands of young people who want to get involved in aviation, they might not be inspired to enter the aviation industry. So you are potentially reducing the amount of people who are going to enter the aviation industry, the people who create and innovate within this airspace. And we don't want that at all. Remote ID does not help that in the slightest. And then finally, one of the limitations and dangers and problems with remote ID relating to the industry and commercial side. Some commercial and industries may no longer be able to operate after remote ID. What happens if your entire business is built around these small drones? Well, I'm sorry, you can't fly these things anymore. So there's a loss of jobs, a loss of income, a loss of tax dollars when you send it back to the government and the people who use the money, people who use these small drones for income. I'm sorry, you can't do that anymore. So there is companies and there is enterprises out there who will be affected drastically. They won't be able to operate and make an income while using these small drones as it is proposed under the current situation. Now, we can move on to our next bit, and this is the dangers and problems with remote ID to hobbyists and recreational users. So first up, there's a straight up invasion of privacy. How a person uses their time for leisure should not be subject to undue interference and unreasonable restrictions, both of which remote ID impose. There is the unfair financial costs. So many drones cost significantly less than the cost needed to fly a drone within a working remote ID system. Some of these drones, they can be as cheap as about $15. Yet a remote ID system itself, they can cost hundreds of dollars, let alone, that could be for the transponder, let alone the need for smartphones and plans, data, all those extra financial costs that would be incurred on top of that. There's some safety concerns, so tracking and surveillance of aircraft and operators by people with illegal intentions. So as it stands, under remote ID, like I said, it's very similar to the industry side. People can open up an app in the future. They'll be able to see exactly who is flying, and they'll be able to see that a pilot is flying and where that pilot is and what that pilot's drone is doing. And that's a huge that is a huge problem, a huge safety concern that I would have with doing that. If my child went out to the park and I want them to follow the rules and regulations like I always recommend, they're flying around, somebody can see, oh, there's a little toy drone flying there. If they have some actions, they could either go and steal that drone, or potentially there's a way to track children and to track people who are out in public doing recreational things. And especially if you're busy looking at the sky, flying around in a drone, you're not going to have the best situational awareness. So there is also some serious safety concerns on tracking of children, the abducting of children, the abducting of property that comes with installing remote ID on your craft. There's the overreaching regulation on leisure activities. So remote ID can completely stop some families from flying together in a park with their drones at the same time, while also providing no real safety benefit to the airspace. So if me and my daughter wanted to go fly these around under some of the proposed regulations, bad luck. Sorry kid, we can't do that anymore. These tiny, small, little safe drones we used to once fly and have fun with, we are no longer able to do that at all. These were very cheap, they were very safe, they didn't cause harm to anybody, except now, that's it. But you're not allowed to do that under remote ID. And there is the completely unrealistic methods of implementation. So many of these micro drones, not only can you not put remote IDs on here, it's simply, they're not going to be able to fly while doing it. So that's why you can't put remote ID on this. And this drone's less than 30 grams. A transponder is going to weigh possibly double, some of them up to double what this whole drone weighs itself. Can you imagine they like to refer to it as a license plate on your car? Oh no, it's a license plate for your drone, but they don't talk about that license plate on your car being a 1-ton trailer of cement or an extra 1-ton license plate. It is completely unfeasible. It's going to cost, there's going to be extra costs associated with it, not also financial. There's going to be environmental costs, extra things happen. There's going to be landfill that's produced. It's going to, of course, cost more resources. It's going to take more power to charge those things, to power up your transponder. There's going to be production costs associated with it. waste costs. So it is just producing more in a time when this planet really needs to be producing less and cutting back on extra things to go and fly. I don't need to add extra plastic and metal and copper and other pieces to this drone to have fun with it. It's just completely unnecessary. And then we've also got harassment and persecution. So due to a mistake by authorities, so a stolen transponder could create a situation where an otherwise innocent individual, they could be in legal trouble if a third party used their transponder, or if the authorities just looked something up and went, yeah, that person, they had remote ID, that's got to be the drone that's causing some trouble. For example, look what happened on the Gatwick Airport incident. I think it was in 2018. So on the 19th of December, I'll see if I can put a source or cite this down below. The airport was shut down because somebody suspected they saw a drone. Lo and behold, 2 days later, a couple that lived 2 miles away or less than 2 miles from the airport, they were a registered drone user. They were taken in for questioning for 36 hours until they were released with no charge. They were harassed. Their pictures were published in the paper. They were completely innocent. All they did was follow the regulations and the law that the authorities had suggested, and yet they were the ones that were persecuted and harassed. All right, so moving on, we're going to be talking about why remote ID does not in any meaningful way address its proposed objectives. So I'm all about safety. I want to keep our airspace as safe as possible, share it with as many people as possible, both industry and also recreational users. I think the sky is a fantastic thing that we should all be able to use, and we all have the right to use. However, there are some terrible things here the remote ID is doing that it is simply not addressing as well. So it says it wants to prevent mid-air collisions. Well, these drones flying around, they have a limit to what they're allowed to fly out legally, and aircraft have a limit of what they're allowed to fly out legally, how low they can get. Those two don't overlap. So I think in the US, it's like 400 feet, and the planes cannot legally, or manned aircraft can't go below 500 feet. Those two should never be overlapping. There really shouldn't be. You've got some bigger issues or some bad actors if that is happening, people already breaking the law, if there's going to be a mid-air collision. And second, if you're relying on your remote ID system all the time to be your main way of checking if the sky is safe, you could come across some places where you're not doing your reasonable due diligence, or you're relying on a system that could have breakdowns, your network could be out. You could get some hiccups, some things you don't know about, where you should just be looking at the skies, using the things we have traditionally focused on, looking, listening, what is around, are you flying in a safe manner to prevent mid-air collisions, those sorts of things, because so far doing that in the past, we have had 0 deaths associated to drone flying. So there we go. There has been 0 deaths associated, remember this, from flying these drones around. No, when it comes to mid-air collisions and that sort of stuff. And that is without remote ID. So who knows how is remote ID going to improve on 0? It can't. It's not going to work. Now, excuse me. So moving on, the next bit, their objective of tracking illegal or non-compliant drone use. Remote ID does not change this or do this in the slightest. Now, I imagine this is the biggest security and safety concern that the authorities would push, that the people making the policies would say, we're going to be able to track the drones and stop these people doing that. That is simply not the case. Remote ID is only going to punish the law-abiding citizens with the things we mentioned above. It is not going to stop those people who already have some nefarious intent. So if you're a terrorist, if you're somebody who wants to do something wrong with the drone, you are not going to be registering and using your drone with remote ID in the first place. Now, I am lucky to have a few friends who work in policing and some other agencies, and I rang them up and had a chat with them, and I said, look, in your experience, if somebody commits, for example, a gun crime, is it normally with a registered firearm or with an unregistered firearm? And lo and behold, when people doing serious crimes are using a firearm, chances are it is more likely than not, in their experience, that that firearm is not registered. So having an unregistered drone versus registered drone is a very similar situation. People with nefarious intent, or terrorists, or people who are going to do something security-wise that they shouldn't be, they're not going to register their drone. It's not going to be trackable because it doesn't have remote ID. You're not going to know who is doing what when the person is using it when they're up to no good. The only thing it would be good for is tracking people who are already doing the right thing, in which case there's no need to track them. Now, the next part, they would like to educate the community around local laws and regulations relating to drone use. So installing a little remote ID system, it does not teach me anything about drones. It does not teach me about how to be safe in the community. It does not teach me how to be safe in the airspace. It is absolute nonsense that a little piece of transponding technology that is broadcasting data teaches me about the airspace. It is not going to happen. Something like a simple app on a smartphone will be much easier. Am I allowed to fly here? Oh, look at this map. I'm not allowed to. Here's the ceiling. Here's how far you can go. This is the restricted flight zone. All that data can already be accessed on a phone, which most people already have. They don't need to go and purchase and put some of these limitations in their drone. So here we've got the gathering of data. This is another one of their objectives, which will form evidence-based stuff to support future regulatory and policy development. So gathering of data for safety and security reasons would only be from law-abiding citizens, because they're the only ones who are putting remote ID on their drone under this proposal. People who want to break the law or are non-compliant, you're not going to get any data on them. If you are trying to come up with a security system or have a look at the way your security handles the airspace around people doing the wrong thing, you don't have any data on that because those people are not putting remote ID on their craft. You are only going to get information on people who are doing the right thing, people who have registered their craft, people who are following the law, law-abiding citizens. Now, there's a much simpler and less intrusive way to gather general flight information. A simple app for a person could be, look, I'm flying here. And we're going to have some other suggestions towards the end to meet this objective of gathering data as well. So but here we're just talking about why remote ID doesn't address these issues. So they would also like to facilitate a faster, more efficient and automated approval to operate in the airspace. And I would say remote ID actually increases the time and makes it riskier to go and fly. So instead of having something like I've seen in some other situations, a smartphone app, well, now I actually have to get my drone working, its GPS and everything working, connected to it, synced up to my broadcasting to my system, whatever I'm using, to my phone, and then sending that off. Why cannot I just check the airspace with my phone instead? And it is also, it's introducing another point of failure. If I need to check if this drone is safe to fly in this airspace, you've got not only the remote ID has to work perfectly along with your phone, it's adding in 2 steps to something that could be solved with just 1 step. Here's a 1-step problem. Introducing remote ID does not authorize me to get flying anywhere near quicker, and in fact probably does so slower than if I was just using my phone itself. And then we've got the last one here. Their aim is to support the management of and response to other drone-related issues such as noise, privacy, environmental concerns, etc. through adjacent technologies. Now, remote ID, it's going to require financial investments and extra resource investments, timing and training to implement, further straining the authorities' abilities to respond to these above issues. So it's adding even more pressure. They've got to learn and do all this extra stuff, get the tech to be able to track all that sort of stuff down on top of what they're already doing. Now, like what the remote ID aims to do, I would also like to tackle some of its objectives. So I've come up with some solutions here that hopefully some people can take note of. So these are different ways, recommendations for achieving remote ID's objectives without the limitations that remote ID proposes. So number 1, preventing mid-air collisions. Clearer and simpler guidelines on where and how to fly. A smartphone app that can tell drone operators, am I allowed to fly in this area, with an easy-to-read map showing no fly zones, restricted fly space. Imagine that. You don't need to add all this extra stuff right here on your drone itself. Oh, I can look at an app. Here it is. That's how I can go and fly. Number 2, preventing those mid-air collisions. You could have the continuation and education of the altitudes that all aircraft are allowed to operate in, and most of these uncrewed operations, they happen well below the airspace. They happen a lot of the times below the tree level that is flying around. So some recommendations would be a change in policy on how drones can operate in everyday air, in airspace below that altitude. There shouldn't be any worries about some mid-air collisions. And in the past, like I've said, without remote ID, we've had 0 deaths. 0 deaths from mid-air collisions with unmanned aircraft. Here is tracking illegal or non-compliant drone users. So a simple app for the public. Like I said, remote ID, it's not going to help you track those people with nefarious intent. It's not going to show you what they're doing. You're not going to be able to find out what they're flying. So all you're going to be able to do is see the law-abiding citizens who have put remote ID on their craft. Here I would say you could do that with an app, a community app. Oh look, just like if someone's breaking or doing the wrong thing, who do you ring? You ring the police on your phone. You could have a simple app where you could put in, it wouldn't cost anything. It could be, someone could design it. It could be free to download, and it's like, oh look, you know, we've got, sorry, I've got my papers mixed up right here. You know, it could be an app. This person's, I can see a drone operating in this airspace. It could be sent to the correct authorities. And guess what? People, the public, they can see those drones flying around. They can report those whether they've got remote ID or not. Now, the gathering of data which were formed evidence-based to support regulatory policy development. So the policy would also like to gather some data on how the airspace is being used, and they're hoping that remote ID will allow them to do that, where there are some less intrusive ways to also meet that objective. So number one, individual drone operators, they could just simply log that on an app if they wish. Say, oh look, I flew here, I flew for this long, these were the wind conditions, this is whatever the data that you would like to be collected, we can enter that within an app. We don't need to go in and add expensive waste producing products to our drone, which have a huge detriment and safety effects. We don't need to add those to our drone. We can give you that information. We can type that in for you during our flights. We can log our flights. And also, if you would like real-time flight data, how are these drones moving through the airspace? Well, there are plenty of companies out there that keep this for themselves. They are already tracking this. So Google deliveries, Amazon deliveries, you can request their flight path data from them to make some assumptions on how drones use the airspace. So you've got both real-time data and also recreational pilots around there. If you wish, you could request their data through a simple app. The second last one we've got right here is one of the remote ID objectives is to faster facilitate more efficient and automatic approvals to operate in airspaces which drones may need permission. You're not going to get this. Guess how easy this would be. Imagine a little map or a thing, a government app, a FAA app, a CASA app. Can I fly here? It checks your GPS. Yes. No. Restricted airspace. Here's the limitations. Yes, you can go for it. Whatever it may be, with some safety guidelines. Imagine throwing some education and tips in there with that app as well. I don't need remote ID. I don't need to install this thing on this craft if I can just have it on my phone that says, yeah, you can fly here. Done. Guess what? I didn't need to buy a whole bunch of different transponders. People didn't need to spend extra money. These crafts could still fly with that proposal. Just have an app that tells me right then and there. It's going to be quick, boom. Oh look, I can fly. We don't need remote ID to do that. And then the last one, we've got support management of and response to other drone-related issues such as noise, privacy, and environmental concerns through adjacent technologies in the future. Now, of course, here's an idea. We can already invest in the things that we have done, that the things police and authorities have already worked on, that they already have training for. You could just give them a little bit more funding to use the traditional, tried and proven ways that they've managed those above issues. So we don't need all this extra information and burden on society to essentially meet these objectives of remote ID. The actual remote ID thing in itself, in conclusion, remote ID, its objectives are great. They plan to have a safe airspace that we can all use. The proposed way of implementing remote ID is completely ridiculous. It does not solve a single issue in a meaningful way that cannot be solved in a simpler, cheaper, and less obtrusive way to society and industry. It shouldn't even be called remote ID. It should have nothing to do with the actual craft itself. There should be more, I guess, discussions and policies around operational use, how to use these drones on the ground, what information does a pilot have access to things that is already in the community, and these issues that remote ID is trying to address are important, but they can be done in a much better way. So look, I know it was a bit of a long video today. I do have a paper that I am currently working on. Sorry, it's been a little bit, look, that's just some, that's a little bit about, that's a little bit of the, it's been a bit of work, that's what I should say. Look, if you enjoyed this and you watched it all the way through, please share this video around, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. I'd like to give a huge shout out to other channels out there too, like XJet. I know he has, or Bruce from RC Model Reviews, I'll put his link down below. He's been doing some fantastic work. If I've made a mistake, I would love to learn more. If you have some other ideas, if you are in the industry and you find a problem with remote ID that it doesn't in an overarching and unnecessary way burden the industry and the community, please let us know if you've got some better solutions. I'm all about getting people flying, but I think this is a massive and gross overreach of regulation and implementation of an idea which doesn't really solve any of its objectives. Other than that, subscribe for more FPV related content, and as always, happy and safe flying.